Hello and welcome back to another Magic the Gathering EDH deck tech idea. Today we are taking a look at Nazar, the Velvet Fang. It is a 4 mana 3/3 with Menace, and whenever you gain life, put a feeding counter on Nazar, the Velvet Fang. Whenever Nazar attacks, you may remove 3 feeding counters from it. If you do, you draw 3 cards and you lose 3 life. This is a card draw engine in your command zone that cares about you gaining life to enable this card draw. And as I've started building this deck, I've challenged myself to build a deck that only features up to uncommons, so you won't find any rare or mythic slots in this deck, which also makes this deck a really cool budget commander, as I have checked it on Card Market and it cost around about 80 euros at the time of recording. But let's get right into the deck. We wanna enable Nazar as fast as possible to profit even more from our gain life mechanics and draw towards our win cons. The first few turns in the game we will either ramp or play a few of the following cards, like Spectrum Sentinel, a 1 mana 1/2 and it has protection from multicolored, and whenever a non-basic land enters the battlefield under an opponent's control you gain 1 life. This card is great in this deck, as within a turn cycle with Nazar on the battlefield you might be already at 3 feeding counters, and in addition to that, due to it having protection from multicolored, it is a great blocker. We play Bontu's Monument, a 3 mana legendary artifact, and black creature spells you cast cost 1 less to cast. Furthermore, whenever you cast a creature spell, each opponent loses 1 life and you gain 1 life. Due to the fact that we are in a multiplayer game, I have focused on all of those cards targeting all of your opponents, just so that you have as much impact as possible with all your cards. Bontu's Monument doesn't only discount our creature spells, it also drains our opponents and also feeds Nazar. We play Demon's Horn, a 2 mana artifact, and whenever a player casts a black spell you may gain 1 life. This also counts for yourself, so you already enable this card, but if there are even more black players at the table you also profit from that. We play Staff of the Death Magus, a 3 mana artifact, and whenever you cast a black spell or swamp enters the battlefield under your control you gain 1 life. We are a monocolored deck, so we feature a bunch of swamps in this deck, so already by playing our land drops we get even closer to drawing even more cards. We play Fountain of Renewal, a 1 mana artifact, and at the beginning of your upkeep you gain 1 life. When needed we can also pay 3 mana and sacrifice it to draw another card. Another great 1 mana artifact is Prism Ring, a 1 mana artifact, and as it enters the battlefield choose a color. Whenever you cast a spell of the chosen color you gain 1 life. But we cannot survive by only having artifacts that gain us life, we also need a little bit of board presence. There is a slight vampire theme in this deck, as there are also cards in this deck that synergize with vampires. So we play Vampire Spawn, a 3 mana 2/3, and when it enters the battlefield each opponent loses 2 life and you gain 2 life. We play Osir Stick Twister, a 2 mana 2/2 with lifelink and Delirium. At the beginning of your end step, if there are 4 more card types among cards in your graveyard, each opponent may sacrifice a non-land permanent or discard a card. Then Osir Stick Twister deals damage equal to its power to each opponent who didn't sacrifice a permanent or discard a card this way. Keep in mind that this creature has lifelink, so you will also gain life if your opponents don't sacrifice a non-land permanent or discard a card. We play Sanguine Siphoner, a 2 mana 1/3, which is already a solid bodyline, and whenever this creature attacks each opponent loses 1 life and you gain 1 life. We also need really efficient blockers, so we play Vampire Nighthawk, a 3 mana 2/3 with flying, death touch and lifelink. For even more repeatable drain we play Creeping Bloodsucker, a 2 mana 1/2, and at the beginning of your upkeep Creeping Bloodsucker deals 1 damage to each opponent and you gain life equal to the damage dealt this way. Another great blocker on turn 1 is Vampire Neonate, a 1 mana 0/3, and you can pay 2 mana and tap it, so each opponent loses 1 life and you gain 1 life. Not only do we drain our opponents with our creatures, we also got more synergistic cards. We play Sinister Monolith, a 4 mana artifact, and at the beginning of combat on your turn, each opponent loses 1 life and you gain 1 life. Furthermore, it also has an inbuilt card draw engine, which might be needed for you because you can tap it, pay 2 life and sacrifice it to draw 2 cards, but you can only do this at sorcery speed. To accelerate our game plan to drain our opponents out, we play Starscape Cleric, a 2 mana 2/1 with Offspring for 3 mana. It has flying, it can't block, and in addition to that, whenever you gain life, each opponent loses 1 life. Let's profit even more from our land drops. We play Retreat to Hagra, a 3 mana enchantment with landfall, so whenever land enters the battlefield under your control, choose one. Either target creature gets +1/+0 and gains Death Touch until end of turn, or each opponent loses 1 life and you gain 1 life. Depending on the board state, you will just give Nazar Death Touch, so he will at least kill 2 creatures if your opponents decide to block him, or you keep draining your opponents to put even more feeding counters on Nazar. We play Shadows of the Past, a 2 mana enchantment, and whenever a creature dies, scry 1. We do not play any tutors in this deck, so scrying helps us to find the cards that we need, and remember that it counts for every creature in every turn, so you will scry a lot with this card. Furthermore, for 5 mana, each opponent loses 2 life and you gain 2 life. Activate this ability only if there are 4 more creature cards in your graveyard. Sure, this isn't the cheapest drain effect, but it can come in handy if you find yourself in a tough spot, and it is also an enchantment that stays on the battlefield, so it will help you with your devotion. We play Marauding Blight Priest, a 3 mana 3/2, and whenever you gain life, each opponent loses 1 life. Probably my favorite card in this deck is Arterial Flow, a 3 mana sorcery, each opponent discards 2 cards. If you control a vampire, each opponent loses 2 life and you gain 2 life. This card does it all for us. In the best case, you get rid of 6 cards of your opponents, you drain them, and you also put another feeding counter on Nazar. We are in mono black, so we play a bunch of removal spells to keep the board in check. And if you know my videos, you know that I love playing a bunch of edict effects as soon as we have black enabled, but I would also like to feature a few other cards that are really helpful in this deck. For example, Oubliette, a 3 mana enchantment, and when it enters the battlefield, target creature phases out until Oubliette leaves the battlefield. Tap that creature as it phases in this way. This powerful enchantment will increase your devotion count, and it can also get rid of one of your opponent's commanders. We play Corrupt, a 6 mana sorcery, and it deals damage to any target equal to the number of swarms you control. You gain life equal to the damage dealt this way. This card can kick out an opponent out of nowhere, as you will have a huge swarm count at some point in the game, and it will also gain you a bunch of life. We play Mire in Misery, a 2 mana sorcery, each opponent sacrifices a creature or enchantment. Mono Black isn't known for having the best enchantment removal aside from Feed the Swarm and Withering Torment, but Mire in Misery also does a lot of work, as you can get off a few creatures, and if one of your opponents doesn't have a creature but an enchantment, you will also get rid of that. We play The Eldest Reborn, a 5 mana enchantment saga, and in the first chapter each opponent sacrifices a creature or planeswalker. On the second chapter each opponent discards a card, and on the third chapter you get a nice reanimation effect as you put a creature or a planeswalker from a graveyard onto the battlefield under your control. To interact with even more creatures, we play Consuming Corruption, a 2 mana instant, and it deals X damage to target creature or planeswalker, and you gain X life, where X is the number of swarms you control. One of the best versatile removal spells in this deck is Typhing Blade, a 2 mana artifact, and when it enters the battlefield each opponent sacrifices a creature. After that it can still help your game plan, as you can craft it with a creature for 5 mana, and then you will get the Consuming Sepulture. This artifact says at the beginning of your upkeep each opponent loses 1 life and you gain 1 life, which is another powerful drain effect that can help you in this deck. You want to win more? You get it. As you have seen so far, we play a bunch of small creatures that have nice synergistic effects, but there are also a few that have one-time effects for us, so we can also sacrifice them into our top-end creatures. We play Dusk Mangler, a 7 mana 5/4, and as an additional cost to cast a spell, sacrifice a creature, discard a card, or pay 4 life. When Dusk Mangler enters the battlefield, each opponent sacrifices a creature, discards a card, and loses 4 life. As you might have gotten by now, it is very important for me to target all of your opponents, as I prefer to be the threat in a commander game, and a bunch of these cards that I have featured in this deck so far target all of your opponents. And so does our top-end creatures. We play Gormand, a 6 mana 5/5, and as an additional cost to cast a spell, sacrifice a creature. It has Flying and Trample, and when it enters the battlefield, each opponent sacrifices a creature. We play the Vile Mutilator, a 7 mana 6/5, and as an additional cost to cast a spell, sacrifice a creature or enchantment. It has Flying and Trample, and when it enters, each opponent sacrifices a non-token enchantment, then sacrifices a non-token creature. We also got the Arbiter of Woe, a 6 mana 5/4, and as an additional cost to cast a spell, sacrifice a creature. It has Flying, and when this creature enters, each opponent discards a card and loses 2 life, you draw a card and gain 2 life. The most powerful drain effects that we can play until uncommon slots are, for example, Grey Merchant of Asphodel, a 5 mana 2/4, and when it enters, each opponent loses X life, where X is your devotion to black, and you gain life equal to the life lost this way. And the last finisher in this deck is Exsanguinate, a 2 black and X sorcery, each opponent loses X life and you gain life equal to the life lost this way. Alright guys, these were a few cards that I would play in Nazar, the Velvet Fang. Let me know which cards you would add to the deck, which legendary creature I shall feature next. Make sure to check out my full deck list in the notes below and let me know if you enjoyed this budget commander deck tech. And then I would say see you in the next one. Goodbye guys.